Imagine waking up in a village where even a sideways glance could seal your fate, where whispers carried the weight of death, and fear was more contagious than the plague. You're a woman who knows how to heal with herbs, or perhaps a man who keeps to himself, walking the woods alone. Maybe you're just too poor, too rich, too strange, or too beautiful. None of that matters. All it takes is one accusation, and suddenly you're the devil's accomplice. Your hands are bound, the villagers are screaming, and the church bell tolls, not for worship, but for your execution. This is not just a scene from some dark fairy tale. This was reality for tens of thousands across Europe and the New World. Welcome to the dark legacy of witch hunts, a terrifying chapter of human history driven by fear, religion, power, and paranoia. A time when reason collapsed and fire consumed the innocent. This is not just a story of the past. It's a chilling reflection of how easily society can unravel when fear is weaponized. Witch hunts didn't begin in medieval times, nor were they isolated to a few hysterical villages. They were global, systemic, and terrifyingly organized. The roots stretch deep into ancient times, where in Mesopotamia, Babylonian texts already spoke of curses and malevolent magic. But it wasn't until Christianity began to dominate the Western world that the idea of witchcraft turned into a heretical crime. Early church doctrine didn't even believe witches existed. It was seen as pagan superstition. But by the 15th century, that all changed. The publication of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, in 1487 acted like gasoline thrown on a flickering fire. Written by two Dominican monks, this grim manual detailed how to identify, interrogate, and execute witches. It turned rumor into doctrine and created a step-by-step playbook for terror. Suddenly, your neighbor's bad harvest or your baby's illness wasn't misfortune. It was malice, and someone had to pay. Across Europe, panic swept like wildfire. Germany, France, Switzerland, Scotland. Villages and cities alike fell under the spell of collective fear. The numbers are staggering. Conservative estimates suggest between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft between the 15th and 18th centuries. Others put the figure higher. The victims, mostly women. In fact, in some regions, up to 80% of those accused were female. Widows, midwives, healers, or simply those who stood out. Patriarchy fused with theology, turning the female body into a site of suspicion. A woman who enjoyed sex? A witch? A woman who didn't marry? A witch? A woman who spoke out? A witch? The trials themselves were macabre theater. Accused individuals were stripped, shaved, pricked with needles to find devil's marks. If you floated in water, you were a witch. If you sank, you were innocent, but dead. Torture was not only permitted, it was encouraged. Because pain, they believed, forced the truth out. But what kind of truth comes from broken bones, burned skin, and shattered minds? Let's jump to Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. This sleepy Puritan town would become the most infamous witch trial site in American history. It started with a few girls convulsing and screaming. They claimed they were cursed. And just like that, the witch hunt began. Within months, over 200 people were accused. 19 were hanged. One was pressed to death with stones. Others died in prison. The reasons? Land disputes, jealousy, religious fervor, and mass hysteria. Children accused their own mothers. Husbands testified against wives. The legal system collapsed into chaos, all under the banner of righteousness. It was neighbor turning on neighbor. Justice turned into vengeance. But this wasn't just about superstition. Witch hunts were a form of social control. When times were hard, during plagues, famines, or wars, people wanted answers, and those in power found scapegoats. Accusing a witch was a convenient way to explain the unexplainable. Why did the crops fail? A witch. Why did disease spread? A witch. Why did your child die in the night? A witch. And in many cases, accusing someone could also be profitable. You could inherit their land, seize their possessions, or rise in social rank. The system fed itself, fueled by fear, greed, and the illusion of divine justice. What makes this even darker is that these weren't isolated mobs with pitchforks. They were often sanctioned by courts, judges, kings, and even the church itself. Witch hunting became an institution. Professional witch hunters traveled from town to town, making a living off of extracting confessions and orchestrating executions. Books were published, sermons preached, children were taught. Witchcraft wasn't just feared, it was embedded into the culture, and the psychological toll was devastating. Entire communities were ripped apart, families destroyed, generations traumatized, and yet there were always skeptics, brave souls who dared to question the madness. In 1597, King James VI of Scotland, yes, the same James who commissioned the King James Bible, wrote Demonology, promoting witch hunts. But just a few decades later, intellectuals like Reginald Scott in England and Friedrich Spey in Germany began challenging the logic of the trials. They argued that torture produced false confessions, that innocent people were dying, that this was madness disguised as morality. Their words planted seeds, but it would take centuries for those seeds to grow. By the late 1700s, the Enlightenment dawned. Science and reason began to challenge superstition. Witch trials became rarer, skepticism grew, and eventually, laws were changed. But the scars remained. Even as the fires burned out, the echo of those screams lingered. And though witch hunts officially ended, the mindset didn't. Because witch hunts aren't just a historical event, they're a psychological phenomenon. The same mechanisms that drove them are still alive today. Mass hysteria, scapegoating, fear-driven persecution. Just replace witch with communist, terrorist, immigrant, or other. The names change, but the machinery stays the same. And here's where the story turns modern. In the 20th century, during the McCarthy era in America, witch hunts took a new form. This time, it wasn't witches, it was communists. People were blacklisted, interrogated, and imprisoned over accusations, often without evidence. Careers were destroyed, lives ruined. Once again, fear overrode justice. And today, in the age of social media, cancel culture, and digital mobs, the witch hunt has gone digital. A single tweet, a misunderstood post, an allegation, true or false, can erupt into a viral storm. People lose their jobs, reputations, and sometimes their lives. The court of public opinion moves faster than truth ever could. And just like in the past, nuance dies and judgment reigns. But why does this keep happening? Because the witch hunt appeals to something primal. It gives us a target. It simplifies a complex world into us versus them. It makes fear manageable by assigning blame. And it makes ordinary people feel powerful, at least for a moment. But that power is built on the suffering of others. It's a fleeting, hollow victory that leaves behind nothing but ashes and regret. The real danger isn't the witches, it's the witch hunters. It's what we become when we abandon empathy, logic, and due process. We often think of the past as barbaric, of burning stakes and torture chambers as relics of a less civilized time. But the truth is, the line between then and now is razor thin. The witch hunt isn't a historical anomaly. It's a human constant. It adapts, it evolves. And unless we confront its roots, fear, ignorance, and the thirst for control, it will return, again and again. So when you hear the next story of someone being canceled, accused, or condemned without evidence, ask yourself, are we seeking justice or just feeding the fire? The legacy of witch hunts is not just the bodies buried or the names forgotten. It's the warning they left behind. That reason can fall, that fear can win, and that we are never too far from the edge. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if we don't listen, we'll find ourselves repeating verses in a far darker key. Witch hunts may be rooted in the past, but their spirit haunts our present and threatens our future. So the next time you hear someone laugh about the superstitions of old, remember the screams behind those jokes. Remember the lives lost not to magic, but to madness. And ask yourself the one question that matters. If the fire starts again, will you fan the flames or fight to put them out? Because in the end, we are all just one accusation away from the stake. And that is the true horror of the witch hunt. Not the magic, not the devil, but us.